Al Floss presents the complete and alarming history of America's greatest garage band, the Stools.
The Stools truly were America's greatest garage band, no question.
Good morning, daylight. Come on and crack it down.
Greatest? Maybe. You could say prodigious or encyclopedic.
Good morning, flowers.
It's a little early to refer to them in the past tense. They are America's greatest garage band, if not the world's.
Well, good morning, Bowinkle Moose.
Vast, maybe.
I'll let the day begin.
It's hard to think of a time before there was the Stools, you know?
Listen, there's so many myths and urban legends about this band and about, rock in general. I'm hoping that this can kind of set the record straight. Let's take the myth of Led Zeppelin, the groupie, and the Mud Shark. First of all, it wasn't Led Zeppelin, it was Vanilla Fudge. I personally know that they were opening that night. Second of all, it wasn't a groupie, it was a housekeeper. And third of all, it wasn't a mudfish at all, it was Antonio Moretti of the Stools.
So I think they wear their cult band status with honor, like Biz, Billy Childish, Mark A. Smith, Leotard.
There's nothing wrong with being a cult band. The Misfits, Ex-Japan, dare I say the Grateful Dead, they all seem to do okay.
Monstrous in many ways, yeah, monstrous.
The story of the Stools starts in the early 1950s, before there was even a band. American folklorist and ethnomusicologist Alan Lomax was collecting field recordings in the Deep South, unaware that Congress had cut off funding for the Library of Congress's folk song collection some 10 years earlier.
Al Lomax was, of course, instrumental in cataloging much of the music that we now call Americana from the Deep South. Remember, it was 1952. Gas was 20 cents a gallon. Mr. Potato Head was being touted as the new educational toy, and the first issue of Mad Magazine hit the stands.
So they say that Lomax was afraid to go into the dark parts of town. He had to make do with white singers and blues artists that were willing to come and record into his newfangled tape recorder.
A Cordette Magnacord, by the by.
One such artist was a young Elvin Anderson, who was lured into Lomax's hotel room with the promise of a ham sandwich and $5 for every song he could play on the guitar.
That a young boy would go meet a grown man in a hotel room is unthinkable today. But back in the 50s, well, it was more innocent time. Anderson made 15 recordings that day, the most famous of which was his take on the traditional spiritual Plow Jones.
Plow Jones, he's a joint. He plowed your wives when you went to work. Plow Jones.
You can hear in Plow Jones that the legend must be true. The song literally dripped with the zeitgeist of the sharecropper's son in the Deep South. Stirring.
The story goes that the 1952 field recording of Plow Jones was recorded just moments before the hotel detective threw a young Elvin Anderson out into the street.
They held Alan Lomax for suspicion of violating the Mann Act.
Apparently not that innocent of a time.
Elvin Anderson was a waif of sorts, like he grew up in a Dickens novel, only he was kicking around the American South, not London. Having left the fields for the city, he survived on only his wit and his guitar.
3 weeks later, when he got out, Lomax tracked down Elvin Anderson at the Caddies Lounge at the country club, and he got him to record one last song. the spiritual, traditional classic, Pheasant Plucking Blues.
Now a pheasant plucker, I'm a pheasant plucker's son. No, I'm not a pheasant plucker, I'm a pheasant plucker's son.
Those early field recordings by Alan Lomax are really a find. You can hear the very roots of the Stools and of rock and roll itself.
Of course, even at a young age, Anderson was no fool. He took that pheasant plucking song, which was an old spiritual, and he somehow finagled the rights to it so that he owned the music publishing. Even then, he knew that that was a big deal.
These field recordings were very important. You know, not just for the names that your mom's ilk would know, like your Howlin' Wolf, your Muddy Waters. I'm talking about the influential artists who really made a difference. Your Elvin Anderson, your Ruffin Redbone, your Chafe McGee, Shorty McGonigal, Shats McGee, Shank Bernstein, the list goes on.
In March of 1952, writer-producer David Bartholomew brought a young Lloyd Prince to J&M Studios in New Orleans to audition a new song for Art Roop of Specialty Records out of LA. The song they performed was Bartholomew's Lottie Miss Claudie. The backing band was made up of Sal Duchette on piano, Ernie McLean on guitar, bassist Frank Fields, drummer Earl Palmer, and Herb Hardesty and Joe Harris on saxophone. They tried several times to record the song, but it just wasn't clicking.
Bartholomew tossed Sal Doucette out of the session and replaced him with his old pal, Fats Domino.
The record went on to the #1 spot on the Billboard charts for 7 weeks after it was released a month later. A dejected Sal Doucette hung his head, cried, and went to the Dewdrop Inn, a local watering hole where Elvin Anderson was entertaining the mid-afternoon drinkers with his version of the blues.
Sal convinced the drunk Elvin Anderson that Art Roop had come to town and was looking for local talent, had heard about Anderson and wanted to get him into J&M Studios immediately. But a vengeful Doucette warned Anderson that David Bartholomew was jealous of Anderson's talent and was going to try and keep him out of the studio.
The story goes, one thing led to another. Punches were thrown, shots were fired, flasks were broken open, and Elvin Anderson eventually did record one song at the L&M Studios that day. The mournful, "She's Out Drinking with My Friends."
I wouldn't call it slum per se, but I was on the wrong side of the tracks. Just want to see how the governor was spending my sales tax. Well, I met this girl, well, by girl, I mean, she was backdated. That's just how I can cute, mute, and intoxicated. So I stood another round, and I turned on the charm. She said she lived outside of town, over to the truck farm. Well, we never made it back to her shack. In fact, she kind of moved in with me. Ever since that night, she's an occasional absentee. She comes so quickly, she got the fan. I feel so quickly, cause I know how this ends. She's out drinking with my friends. Drinking with my friends. She's out drinking with my friends.
Unfortunately, Art Roop snuck out of the building right before the song began, and Specialty Records would miss out on their opportunity to add Elvin Anderson to their staple of stars.
Art Roop never would have known what to do with the Stools. Specialty Records? It was a mom and pop shop. Bumps Blackwell, early Sam Cooke, that sort of thing. Hell, Roop was actually paying his axe. Almost ruined everything for all of us.
In March of 1953, a former Army sergeant of mixed race who had risen from poverty in communist Cuba finally came to power in that tiny country by way of coup d'etat. An elated United States sent aid in the form of foodstuffs, technology, and culture.
One of those things sent to Cuba, under the banner of cultural exchange, was a young Elvin Anderson, who had been swept up as part of a secret U.S. program to rid our streets of panhandlers and buskers by forcibly sending them to the islands.
Cuba repaid the favor in 1980 by emptying all their prisons and mental health facilities into Florida via the Mariel boat lift.
From what I understand, Elvin Anderson only spent a small amount of time in Cuba, but he did quite a bit of studying up on voodoo, Santeria, zombieism, and you can hear quite a deal of that in his earlier music, his pre-Stools music, like Tripping Time.
So give me a hug, baby. I ain't got kissing to do. If the zombies start chasing us, baby, I'm a tripping you. Baby, I'm a tripping you, baby, I'm a tripping you. I miss your show, but let's be clear, baby, I'm a tripping you. Yeah.
Even in this early song, with the wailing harmonica, you can hear that Elvin really starts to paint a picture with his sound. And this would become an early Stools trademark.
Baby, I'm a trippin' you. Baby, I'm a trippin' you. Baby, I'm a trippin' you. We were safe with the governor, but baby, I'm a trippin' you.
Cuba didn't really work out well for Elvin. I'm told that he actually swam back to Key West from Havana.
When Elvin Anderson came back to the United States, he came across the newly published Diary of Anne Frank.
It was to have a profound effect on his life because a stirring coming-of-age story in Nazi-controlled Amsterdam was sitting in front of the newly published Mad magazine, which Anderson picked up and forever altered the course of his musical journey.
Shut Up and Hold Mommy's Merlot had all the earmarks of future Stools classics. It was fully formed by 1953.
Climb up and drive, I'm the reason you're alive. You are the fruit of my womb. Don't give me no static, it's an automatic. I'm sick of your grump and gloom. I know you're just 8, but you can steer straight. Just keep it inside the roads. Why have you stopped? Is that a cop? Shut up and hold Mama's Merlot.
Can you imagine? How much is that doggy in the window, Via con Dios, Crying in the Chapel, are all on top of the charts, and here's this kid singing about a drunk driving mom.
Steam from box wine sediment. I wouldn't be so glottal if I could afford a bottle of Malbec or maybe Bordeaux. You bet your ass, I'd love a sure ass. Now shut up and hold Mama's Merlot.
Because records were never kept, it's very difficult to tell who actually was playing the double bass, but conventional wisdom and Elvin Anderson himself swears it was James Jamerson. At the time, James was just a high school kid from Edisto Island in South Carolina who soon would move on to Detroit and become the backbone of the Motown sound.
James Lee Jamerson played bass on 30 #1 hits in the pop charts and 70 #1 hits on the R&B charts. He's what you think of when you think of the classic Motown sound.
Oh yeah, James Jamerson. Going to a Go-Go, I'll Be There, Martha Reeves.
You Can't Hurry Love.
I Was Made to Love Her, Bernadette, all those great ghost notes, you know.
You can hear Jamerson's trademark one-fingered hook sound on the double bass and kind of wonder how it would have been if his mom didn't move him away.
1953 was really a banner year in the history of music. It saw the birth of Pat Benatar, Michael Bolton, and Tito Jackson, among others, and the death of Hank Williams, Django Reinhardt, and Dooley Wilson.
53 was the year, let me tell you. Big Mama Thornton's Hound Dog, Ray Charles' Mess Around, and Dean Martin's That's Amore were all on the charts in 53. The Platters had just formed in LA. Frank began recording at Capitol, Sinatra that is. Not Frankie Lyman. That little junkie wouldn't have a hit for another 3 years.
It was on July 18th of 1953 that a truck driver wandered into Sun Recording Studios, paid $3.98 to record 2 songs, My Happiness and That's When Your Heartaches Begin. That truck driver, of course, was Elvis Aaron Presley.
The story goes that outside the Sun Records studio at 706 Union Avenue, there was a young drifter working a shine box. He'd been shining shoes since New Year's and was trying to scrape together $3.98 to record a double-sided acetate.
That young drifter, of course, was Elvin Anderson.
And it's believed that the future king of rock and roll himself paid Anderson 2 cents to take a wire brush to his horsebit suede loafers, bringing Anderson that much closer to his goal.
It is also believed that Anderson stole a ham sandwich and a set of guitar strings out of the lunchbox of Elvis that he left in his truck while he was in the studio. Perhaps the same guitar strings that Anderson used to play the classic, I'm Not Your Therapist.
I'm sorry, what did you say? Don't matter anyway. I'm not your therapist. You need somewhere to cry. Try some other guy. I'm not your therapist. You can have a blast, talk about your...
Remember, those were the days of Roll With Me, Annie. And anything went, lyrically.
And by the end of the summer of 1953, Elvin Anderson had collected enough pennies, 398 of them, to be able to afford to record 2 songs at Sun Studios.
Anderson claimed the songs were going to be a belated birthday gift for his mother. Howsoever, given the lyrical content of the songs, it seems highly unlikely.
Perhaps more believable is the theory that Anderson was simply trying to attract the attention of Sun Records owner Sam Phillips. Unfortunately, the studio had already been booked by the Prisonaires, led by convicted rapist Johnny Bragg. They were a black quartet who had been given permission to leave their cells to record their single, Just Walking in the Rain, a song that would become a hit for Johnny Ray 3 years later.
Not one to wait, Anderson took his 398 down the block to the smaller Chansey studios, and Sam Phillips would never get his chance at what would become the Stools.
Well, about this time, Sam Phillips came across a song called Without You. It was a ballad sung by a young black man. But Sam Phillips couldn't track down who sang the song. So his secretary, Marion Kieska, suggested that he reach out to this polite white trash named Elvis.
On his way into the studio, Elvis saw Anderson at his shine box with his guitar, this beautiful D'Angelical Excel, strapped to his back, and asked the boy if he knew how to play. I think Elvis was a little disappointed in his own guitar playing, so he dragged Anderson into the studio with him.
The story goes that they tried 3 different nights to get a good take of Without You, Elvin and Elvis together, but it just never gelled. Later, Sam dumped Elvin, brought in Scotty Moore and Bill Black, and the rest is rock and roll history.
On September 10th of 1953, the C.A. Swanson and Sons Company introduced their brand of TV frozen dinners.
Now these were great. It was a Thanksgiving-style meal of turkey and cornbread dressing, frozen peas and sweet potatoes. Of course, desserts such as cobbler and brownies weren't introduced until 7 years later.
Elvin Anderson was hesitant to purchase a TV dinner because he didn't own a TV. And then the clerk at the A&P explained to him that TV dinners were just named that because they resembled a TV, not that you had to sit in front of a TV to eat it. Then Elvin quickly became a fan and started eating at least one Swanson dinner every day.
Several months later, when he realized that the frozen dinners were meant to be heated and not sucked on frozen, he began eating them for all 3 meals. It was around this time that Anderson began his lifelong obsession with songs about food.
Jenny likes meat, she likes it right off the bone. Jenny likes meat, it's all that she'll bring home. She likes the T-bone and them big meatballs. Jenny would take all she can get. But she don't swallow.
It's an acquired taste, but pure Stools from the early days.
In 1954, Elvin Anderson brought his demo recordings to the radio station KWEM in West Memphis, where Howlin' Wolf had once had a show. Station management was not impressed with his recordings.
But they did like the fact that Anderson worked cheap, and frankly, he was white, so they offered him his own program.
All he had to do was follow the formula for the Grand Ole Opry, and it was successful everywhere. Open with a hymn, then a fiddle tune. Next, the host band's latest hit, then a live commercial for the sponsor. In this case, Rice Bran Lard, and then another hymn, Show Over, short and simple.
Anderson did an exhaustive search around the bars of West Memphis to find his backing band, and was ready for his first broadcast, opening with the original hymn, On Your Knees.
When I think of all the time that I wasted, all that time that you should have been with me. That's right. Now, when I think of all your time before the altar, have mercy. That was time you should have spent on your knees. Get on your knees. Get on your
Elvin actually used mostly members of Johnny Ace's band on the radio show, who were also Johnny Otis' band at the time and Johnny Board's band, as well as being known as the C.C. Pinkston Orchestra. Bands did a lot of double duty back then. Anderson tried to steal them full-time as his band, but they stayed with Johnny Ace, which may have been a mistake as Ace blew his brains out on Christmas Day of 1954.
You can listen to what Jim Baker's saying, but Jesus is gonna leave you in the lurch. Get on your knees.
Elvin liked playing with Johnny Ace because Chuck Berry ripped off everything he knew from Johnny Ace's guitar player, Pete Lewis. I mean, just listen to the solo on Ace's You've Been Gone So Long, recorded a year before Berry put down the hairbrush and the scissors and picked up a Gibson ES 350T.
You can say your grace, just don't say it to my face. Honey, I'm tossing my pearls before the swine.
The Elvin Anderson's Rice Bran Lard Roundup was canceled the day after its first broadcast, but that one show was to have a profound effect. Word was out on him.
Now, I know I may sound sacrilegious.
By the late 1950s, songs with suggestive lyrics started to fall out of favor, and perhaps rightfully so. Big Joe Turner, Hank Ballard, and the Midnighters, they really started to fall out of favor. But then acts like Pat Boone and the Crew Cuts and Gale's Storm, they started doing cleaned up versions of those songs.
Anderson was never one to follow fashion, and he kept soldiering on, finding songs that would speak to him and hopefully to others too.
Caucasian invasion of my favorite bar. I guess it's become hip to have a little nip somewhere bizarre.
Caucasian Invasion became a massive hit, crossing over both the country and pop charts.
But they've gone too far. Next thing these dames will be ordering blender drinks, complain about my cigar.
The joke is that the Stools, or Elvin Anderson in particular, sold his soul to the devil to get a hit.
I had heard of his selling the soul to the devil thing, but that story's as old as rock and roll itself.
I can't really speak to that.
Well, there's a rich history of people selling their souls, isn't there? Pope Sylvester II, Paganini, Dr. Faustus. Anybody on reality TV?
Robert Johnson, of course, is the one who comes to mind. Jimmy Page, There are a lot of posers, I think, that would have you believe that they are in league with the devil, but very few of them have ever, done the deal. A lot of hair bands and metal guys pretending, but, Robert Johnson, Page, that simple-minded Van Halen that plays the drums, Alvin Anderson, those guys are the real deal.
It would explain a lot, wouldn't it?
I know you don't get.
So while Alvin Anderson was kicking around the American South, he was shining shoes, offending sensibilities, making deals with the devil, and just picking up work with whichever band he could. The young Cosmo Dittmar was working as a studio musician at VJ Records in Chicago.
VJ was a small but very important indie label. Cosmo Dittmar was playing guitar with a high school band, the Spaniels, when he caught the eye of Vivian Bracken. One of the owners of the label, sweetheart of a lady.
The Spaniels were a doo-wop group from Roosevelt High in Gary, Indiana, which of course gave us Michael Jackson and the whole Jackson clan, R&B Grammy singer Denise Williams, and Ernest Lee Thomas, who played Raj on What's Happening.
The Spaniels were one of the first acts to sign with VJ Records, and they had a huge hit with Goodnight, Sweetheart, Goodnight. But before they could sign, they had to kick Cosmo Dittmar out of the band. I'm not sure why.
Well, he was white, wasn't he? This was the early 50s, and segregated acts really weren't allowed. But Vivian Bracken, to her credit, kept Cosmo around as a session player, and he played for some notable acts and some minor hits.
Perhaps most famously, Cosmo plays on the Del Sharif's Is This Thing On?
Before long, you had the great migration of the Southern blues artists up to Chicago. Your Muddy Waters, your Howlin' Wolf, your Johnny Lee Hooker.
Well, all these acts were hoping to catch on with the great black labels like VJ, Chess, Flash, Thunderbird, or eventually Motown. Although I think Thunderbird might have been just a fortified wine. I'll have to check my notes on that.
Cosmo figured that if all these great blues guys were going north, it would leave a lot of room for a half-bright white kid with all his own teeth down south. So he boarded a bus for his date with destiny. At this point, bands like the Spaniels, the Crows, and the Chords were starting to have mainstream hits with this new style called doo-wop. It had been around since WW2, but it didn't really take off until about 1954.
When the Penguins went to #1 in the R&B charts and #8 on the pop charts with Earth Angel, Alvin Anderson booked himself some studio time and picked up 3 Italian guys off the street to sing backup, clearly misunderstanding the rubric doo-wop.
Life didn't turn out like you planned. You're turning into your old man. You used to be independent free. Now you turn out just like him. Your son's one of those kids you can't stand.
Not surprisingly, the song failed to chart as well.
You're turning out.
The third leg of the founding fathers of the Stools was Tony Moretti out of Pennsylvania.
Antonio Moretti had no real aptitude for music, but he was winning his fair share of yodeling contests at state fairs and carnivals.
And it was after one of these yodeling contests that Antonio was brought into the Big Ten to meet the hillbilly Shakespeare, Hank Williams.
It was on that night, legend has it, that Antonio Moretti would be introduced to country music and wood grain alcohol, both of which would be a major influence on his life.
So Moretti began a lifelong friendship with Williams, which, unfortunately for Williams, would be another 4 years. But then Williams began hanging around with another young man, a juvenile delinquent from Chester, PA, named Bill Haley, who would go on to pioneer rock and roll with his band, the Comets.
The way I understand it, it was while drinking with Hank Williams and Antonio Moretti that a first draft of the song bad boy, good man, slipped out of Bill Haley's sport coat pocket, and it was snapped up by Moretti, who kept it to himself until years later when he had joined up with Elvin Anderson and Cosmo Ditmar, and the Stools were looking for a hit.
He's never been to prison, but he stayed after school a lot. Sitting quiet in the corner like a silent French Huguenot. He might bend the rules, but he never break a lover's knot. 'Cause he's a bad boy, but a good man. Can't help it, the boy can't help it. Yeah, he's a bad boy.
Before he hooks up with the other Stools, Moretti was a young man in Philadelphia. Like most other people in Philly, he had no direction or ambition in his life.
Meet a mountain bozeman, maybe out in Cheyenne. I know one in Spokane, a couple more in San Fran. They're bad boys.
What set Moretti apart, I think, was his problem with depth perception. Every day he would go down to the local pawn shop and peer into the windows at the instruments on the back wall. But he wasn't interested in the guitars or the drums or the trumpets that were featured up front. What caught Moretti's famously weak eye was something else.
Antonio's eyes weren't the only thing that was weak. He knew he wanted to play an instrument, but he wanted something that was easy to carry because he watched his brother Skip lug around a double bass on his bicycle for so long.
On the back wall of the pawn shop, there was this Barry sax. And because there was this great sousaphone in the window right in front of it, from Antonio's perspective, the Barry sax looked tiny. And he began begging his parents to buy him one. So it went on for about a year, and they finally gave in. And he gets this unwieldy saxophone, and he wants to trade it in for a piccolo. And so his father gives him what for?
In the late 50s, what for was a black eye and 3 broken ribs. Well, after he healed, Moretti took up the Barry sax, which was an instrument he learned to resent the rest of his years.
But it's a good thing he did stick with the deep Barry sax, or we might not have had early Stools chestnuts like Walk Right In.
My baby's tight with a buck.
Much like when Joey D'Ambrosio added his saxophone to the Saddlemen's country and western sound, creating Bill Haley, the Comets, and what we now call rock and roll, Antonio Moretti's Barry sax gave birth to the Stools sound.
My girl is different.
And both these sax players were Italian. Think about that. I don't know what that means, but it's significant.
One of the biggest influences on the Stools, or at least Elvin Anderson, was Mitch Miller. It wasn't Miller's work as a conductor or an A&R man or producer at Columbia Records. It wasn't Miller's hundreds of recordings or his TV show on NBC, Sing Along with Mitch. It wasn't even his self-proclaimed reputation as a swordsman among the strumpets of New York that made their mark on Anderson. It was Mitch Miller's beard.
In the 50s, you didn't wear a beard unless you were an Austrian field marshal, an academic, or religious zealot.
And yet, here was Miller, a musician, an oboist, no less, openly flouting a beard.
Anderson would sport a beard on and off for the rest of his life, even after he became disenchanted with Mitch Miller.
Miller had rejected Anderson's demo recording that he sent to Columbia. It was alligator arms, specifically crafted to appeal to Miller's middle-of-the-road taste.
Your crocodile tears are overflowing the feudal banks of my reptile farm. Your head knows right where your feet are going, how to reach my heart's alligator arms.
In the 50s, everyone wanted to be Dean Martin. Even Elvis wanted to be Dean Martin. Elvin Anderson wanted to be Dean Martin. And I told him that alligator arms was no good and that Mitch Miller would turn him down. And that's what happened.
Mitch Miller and his hate for all things rock and roll reared its ugly head when he got Antonio Moretti tossed off of the film Senior Prom. He seemed to have some sort of grudge against the Stools.
Yes, Miller was playing a pivotal role in one of those late 50s teen exploitation films that Columbia was making called Senior Prom, and Antonio had been cast in a small role of Carter Breed III. Miller had Antonio kicked off the film for no good reason at all and replaced by the actor Tom Laughlin.
Tom Laughlin, who would later go on to play Billy Jack in the euphoniously named film franchise, and Moretti, and perhaps rightfully so, felt that the film would have been his, and he never forgot the slight, and he always blamed Mitch Miller.
Now, it's my understanding that after he got rejected, that's when Elvin went down at the crossroads and made his deal with the devil.
If you boil a dead cat, skin it, take its bones, throw it on down the river, all the bones go one way down the river, except one bone goes up against the law of physics. That's the bone you take to make your deal with the devil.
I mean, you would think if someone had sold their souls to the devil, they would have become bigger stars than the Stools did. I mean, yeah, sure, they did meh, but you know, you figured there would have been something at the end of the road.
Well, you can't trust the devil, can you? After all, he's the devil. Who knows what he might have promised Elvin for his soul, and if he kept that promise?
The deal with the devil at the crossroads might be myth-making, but we do know that Elvin Anderson's life was changed at the crossroads. He was hit by an RC Cola truck, and he was hospitalized.
As luck would have it, Cosmo Ditmar was in the same hospital at the same time, suffering from some illness. I don't know what it was.
It was adult onset, syphilitic insanity untold.
And Tony Moretti had just taken a job as a male nurse in the same ward.
One thing led to another, and before you knew it, they were all having an informal jam session as Elvin and Cosmo recovered.
Legend has it that Al Floss was visiting his wife in the hospital at the time, heard them jamming, and signed them to Dutchco Records immediately.
It didn't happen as quickly as all that, but if that's the story you want, that's how it happened.
While he was in the hospital, Elvin Anderson sold a song for $25 to fellow patient Don Graves, who in turn transferred to the U.S. Navy Hospital in Virginia, where he was roommates with Vincent Eugene Craddock.
Elvin says he sold the song as a joke. It was just a reworking of an old Helen Humes song, Bee Baba Liba, set to Drifter's Money Honey.
Graves, in turn, sold the song to Craddock and his manager, the local DJ, Sheriff Tex Davis, for $50. Vincent Eugene Craddock turned out to become Gene Vincent of Gene Vincent and the Blue Caps fame, and that song turned out to be Bebopalula. Elvin might have wanted to hold on to that song.
At the time, 78s were the preferred album of the day, but 45s were starting to take off, so record labels were beating the bushes looking for artists that could cut good singles.
Al Floss told them to crank out the songs and he'd make us all rich. They hit it out of the park with I'll Hold Your Beer. First song right out of the park.
To see that guy looking at us, he's dressed in leather and he thinks he's so tough. I'm off the piece, but enough is enough. Sitting there with 10 of his friends, greasers and chalks and odds and ends. I could take them all, but I guess it depends. As fighting time draws near, there's one thing I want to make clear. I'll hold your beer. I'll hold your beer.
I'll Hold Your Beer was a brilliant first single. They zigged when everyone else was zagging. I mean, with the Stools, you think you're gonna get some bluegrass, but you know what you got was something poppy with a real rockin' beat.
That cream puff over there's a piece of cake. Even though the last kid he punched still ain't awake. But hey, that's a risk I'm willing to take. As fighting time draws near, here's one thing I want to make clear. I'll hold your beer. I'll hold your beer.
Now, rhythm guitar player on that track was Bobby Lee Trammell. And Bobby Lee, he was one of the true characters of rock and roll who just couldn't get out of his own way. He became a drinking buddy of Elvin Anderson's, and maybe that was his problem.
I'll hold your beer.
Bobby Lee Trammell was a good old boy from Jonesboro, Arkansas. He and Elvin Anderson always went out drinking. Bobby Lee would get into trouble. Elvin Anderson would always get off scot-free. Now, Bobby Lee was a stitch whose dancing on stage put Elvis to shame. Whenever Elvin Anderson was in town, the two of them would hit up all the local hot spots like Porky's Rooftop and the Silver Moon out on Highway 67, or the Cotton Club a few miles up 63.
It was at the Cotton Club in Arkansas that Trammell ran into both Carl Perkins and Johnny Cash. Now, Perkins invited Trammell up on stage, and they did a couple numbers. In fact, they were so impressed, they wanted to hook Trammell up with Sun Records. But when Sam Phillips told Bobby Lee to go rehearse and then come in to audition, Bobby Lee gets bored, packs up, moves to California.
Trammell did finally get a recording contract with Faber Robinson, and he brought in Elvin, James Burton, and James Kirkland to play on his first single, Shirley Lee. It wasn't a big hit, but it sold fairly well, and Elvin brought the song to his Hollywood friend Ricky Nelson, who covered it on his second album, again with Burton and Kirkland playing on the track.
Trammell was invited to audition for Ozzie and Harriet, but he frightened Ozzie and didn't get the part. Ricky Nelson did tell him that he was interested in anything else he might write, with an interest in recording it, but Trammell blew him off and...
One of Elvin Anderson's and Bobby Lee's favorite things to do was they went to a town, Norco, California, where there was this bar called Chick-a-Bunny, and not only would Bobby Lee pick up a few extra bucks when they played there, but the owner of the place would give them a choice between a chicken dinner or a rabbit dinner, and Elvin just thought that was the funniest thing.
Now, years before The Doors or Iggy Pop or Wendy O. Williams, Trammell loved to rip off his clothes on stage. In fact, he gave a lot of young girls a lot more than they bargained for. He was banned from the Louisiana Hayride for life because of one such wardrobe malfunction.
When local radio station KFWB refused to play Trammell's recording of Dorsey Burnett's Whoa, Whoa Is Me, a drunk Burnett and Elvin Anderson talked an even drunker Trammell into climbing the station's tower and singing the song from up there. The tower broke under his weight, and the police were waiting for him when he hit the ground. Anderson, to his credit, paid Bobby Lee's $250 fine.
There was no love lost between Bobby Lee and Jerry Lee Lewis. Jerry Lee viewed Bobby Lee as sort of a cheap imitation, although I think Bobby Lee might have been the original wild child. The two of them got into a fist fight backstage one time, and one of Jerry Lee's roadies sucker punched Bobby Lee. So later on, Bobby Lee and Elvin took a fire axe to Jerry Lee's piano right before he went on stage.
Bobby Lee Trammell was basically blackballed in the industry. By 1960, nobody would touch him.
Now, Elvin tried to throw him some studio work, but he just wasn't that good of a guitar player, and certainly not up to the standards that the Stools had set for themselves. Now, Elvin being a good guy, he tried to get him some work on a European rock and roll tour with his old friends, the surviving members of Bill Haley's Comets. But during a show in Holland, Trammell, dressed in a Superman outfit, jumped up on a piano, lost his balance, fell over, broke his wrist. End of tour.
Washed up in music, Trammell did what any half-bright, drunk Southern boy would do and got himself elected into the Arkansas House of Representatives in 1997.
One of the first pieces of legislation he proposed was a law proposed to give police officers the power to shoot anyone on sight that appeared to be cooking crystal meth.
Well, the law didn't pass, and Bobby Lee himself passed away in 2008. His story was really more common than you might think for 1950s rock and rollers. Really kind of the flip side of the coin to the Stools.
And the Stools would indeed flip the coin as they prepared to record their first long-playing record, which we will explore next time on the complete and alarming history of America's greatest garage band, the Stools.
Join us then, won't you?
The truth is one option, an option I'd rather not use. If you don't mind, I'll just watch the news. See the news.